The motivation behind perpetrators' actions throughout the Holocaust has been considered by historians for decades. As outlined by Louis, actual perpetrators acted out of a variety of motives, and aside from motives, we must reckon with situational factors. Like this more understanding perspective, Goldenhagen boldly claims that religious prejudice was part of the common culture of Germany, and, as a result, the vast majority of ordinary Germans during the Nazi period were prepared to kill Jews. Whilst Goldenhagen does provide intriguing insight regarding the general mindset of races involved in mass murder in other circumstances, his claims fail to acknowledge the individuality of perpetrators and instead generalizes the motives, experiences, and situations of Nazi perpetrators. Whilst Browning also agrees that there was a high degree of voluntarism by Nazi perpetrators, he seeks to understand the motivation behind the participation and voluntarism. Browning probes the question of how those who presented initial reluctance and lack of enthusiasm became killers. It can clearly be determined that some, if not many, perpetrators were highly anti-Semitic. As described by Paul Johnson, anti-Semitism was highly infectious. This anti-Semitism may have been the sole driving factor for some perpetrators, specifically those such as Hitler and other officials. However, alternative motives based on individual mindsets and situational factors need to be considered when discussing the ordinary men, as described by Browning. Browning highlights the notion of a lack of choice. He displays the emotions of policemen who stated, "Oh God, why did I have to be given these orders?" By including statements such as these in his text, Browning forces the reader to question possible alternatives for such men. What was the fate of many perpetrators if compliance was not made? Loss of a job? Physical or psychological punishment? Harm to their own families? The possibilities of negative consequences are endless in the minds of Nazi perpetrators during World War II. It can also be suggested that perpetrators were not simply anti-Semitic. Rather, they believed wholly in the notion of Volksgemeinschaft and were against anything that impeded it. If this is to be believed, it can be understood that perpetrators were not just anti-Semitic, but rejected any impurity, including homosexuals and those considered by Nazis to be disabled. Holocaust perpetrators could be seen to be battling against many things. Not only were they subjected to contributing to the genocide of over 6 million Jews across Europe, many were also highly preoccupied with the war. The war not only enacted in some the need to protect their country, it enacted in others the need to stay in favour of Nazis in order to protect themselves and their families. It may be seen that without the pressures of war on many perpetrators, their compliance may have been significantly reduced. If these motivations and reasons can be considered, it can be concluded that a large portion of perpetrators were heavily motivated by fear. Fear for themselves, their families, and their country, despite how unrealistic these fears may seem. This conclusion heavily contradicts Goldenhagen, who determined that hatred was the inspiration of most perpetrators. Aside from Nazis, collaborators across Europe must also be examined in determining key motives of those involved in the Holocaust. Louis suggests that Lithuanians, Croats, Romanians, and other ethnic groups murdered Jews as efficiently as, and often with more brutality than, the Germans. This claim suggests that the view of a generalized blame of the Holocaust on German Nazis, often held by the majority of the world, is flawed. Whilst Louis does not assert that German Nazis lacked fault by any means, Louis is able to identify that the Holocaust had perpetrators from a variety of nations. In fact, Louis further mentions that Ukrainians were often enlisted when Germans were unwilling to take part in the killing of children. Unlike the rest of his text, which suggests that motives behind Nazis in the Holocaust were varied, much of Louis' text concludes that anti-Semitism was a major factor in the actions of foreign collaborators. However, other historians, such as Cinder, suggest that those in foreign countries were more heavily motivated by propaganda produced by Nazis during the war, and were particularly afraid of the links between the Jews and the threat of the communists to their lives. In countries that were occupied by Germany throughout World War II, perpetrators' efforts towards contributing to the Holocaust may be seen to have been done to impress and gain favour with the Nazis, whilst forced to live under their brutal regime. This again returns to the notion that fear is an extremely powerful motivator. Nations, such as Lithuania, Romania, and Ukraine, were not only subject to these external pressures, they, much like Nazis in Germany, were also subjected to the unique circumstances of their own individual lives, and again, their motives should not always be generalized. To conclude, the words of Louis summarize this presentation. There was no unique murderous Nazi. The killers came from various backgrounds, had different psychological attributes, and acted out of a variety of motives. Along with this, foreign collaborators also contributed to the Holocaust for a variety of reasons, including fear and anti-Semitism.